Hey guys, today I want to talk to you about the Dawson Knives Gatekeeper. This is a really exciting knife and review for me, being that this is a large knife in MAGNACUT, the largest knife in MAGNACUT that I have reviewed so far. This was supplied by a viewer, so we did not go to the point of purposeful destruction. However, I did abuse this knife to the degree that I believe a knife should be able to handle abuse, and I want to share that experience with you. Now, really quick, a few things that I want to say. This knife has been modified by Dawson Knives. So, how we got started here is I was talking about knife grinds online. All of my friends happen to be knife nerds and survivalists. I wonder why. And I had mentioned, I was talking about support behind the edge and apex stability and stuff like that. And I ended up mentioning that I had heard of some issues with some Dawson knives from, again, other supporters and people who talk to me. You gotta realize that as a knife channel surrounded by knife nerds constantly, and being a knife nerd, I talk to knife people, and these knife people review knives or use knives or own knives that I do not, and we talk about it. Okay, so I knew of 3 of these knives that had similar knives that had been damaged, and this one in particular was sent back to Dawson and they made it right. So I want to see what right means and if Dawson will take some of this information going forward and incorporate it into their future knives. That's something that we're going to talk about as well. Stick around. Typically, I talk about the blade, the handle, and then the sheath. Today, I'm going to start off with something that I want to do that is new. I want to talk about who I think this knife is for, because ultimately, I do these videos to help you, the viewer. And if the knife manufacturer can learn something from my videos or maybe tweak something, make something better, or whatever else, that's secondary, but my primary responsibility is to the viewer, and in this case, to the person who sent me this knife. So this knife, I believe when it came to him the first time, we had a behind the edge thickness of something like 15 to 18 thou, in my opinion, with a hollow grind. That is far too thin for a knife this size, especially considering the fact that it is in MAGNACUT. Not that MAGNACUT isn't tough, it's just thin, guys. I don't know if the toughest metal in existence, something like Carpenter CD #1 or Zap Z-Tough or 15N20 or 8670, I don't know that if everything else was the same, if they would even be able to handle, have the edge stability behind the edge with this grind to hold up to this kind of abuse. So we had waves in the edge. This knife was sent back to Dawson, and now we have an edge that is between 35 thou and 50 thou. And with this grind, it works exceptionally well. I have used this knife as a machete. I have used this knife for some relatively hardcore batoning, and I have used this knife for quite a bit of chopping, to include chopping incredibly hard wood that was unsupported. Something that a lot of people say will break any knife, and I have had no damage or issues. So who is this knife for? That's what I've done. Who's this knife for? I want to start off that way. Dawson knives are expensive. They are handmade. They do use premium materials. They do have beautiful finishes, and the fit and finish is nice. So this is not a knife, in my opinion, not likely to be a knife that caters to the person looking to buy their first knife for anything. Generally, when it comes to the rate of diminishing returns, you can find a production knife that is almost as good but a lot cheaper. So that is where I point people getting their first knife towards typically. This knife is either for someone who wants something a little better, who wants something exclusive, who loves the way that these look, who wants something a little bit different, and or who has the financial ability to purchase it. So look, the reason that I want to get that out here pretty early is because if you are watching this video knowing your budget and thinking about whether or not you want to even watch this review to see if this knife is worth it, that's what I want to lay out for you guys here today. And this knife could be good for someone also who has enough money that the difference between $200 and $800 is not relevant. Now, for the person who is a hardcore knife user like myself, who's looking for one bigger chopper, the price of this knife, if you're going to use this knife every day, I think that it will return its value and it will be worth the money and even be a good value, because if you buy an $800 knife and you use it every single day, and I'm sure I put the MSRP in here, I'm just saying 800, but you use it every single day, what is your cost per use? And is that knife worth the money because you enjoy using it through that entire experience? That is what separates the casual user from the more serious user a lot of times. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the blade and some of the things that are different, interesting, unique about this blade. I know that already people are screaming at their keyboards, typing as fast as they can about hollow grinds and all of this other stuff, and quoting all of the things that I have said about hollow grinds without context. And so we're going to go through all of that because this knife, it is something different, and I have greatly enjoyed the use of this knife. All right, so as you can see, the blade is hollow ground. I mentioned before that we are looking at a behind the edge thickness of between 35 thou and 50 thou, 50 thou being at the tip. Now your behind the edge thickness, that is at your secondary bevel here, the shoulders of that bevel way up here, how thick is that? This is one of the greatest determining factors to how slicey and or how tough your knife is going to be. It is a greater determining factor than your steel or your hardness. Now, once you have set the behind the edge thickness that you want, that is where you dial it in with the steel that you choose and the hardness that you need to support and maintain that edge and the end use. But it should all start not with the steel and the hardness, but the edge geometry behind the edge. So you got a little education here, because a lot of the other knife reviewers, even the people who talk about edges and stuff like that, they don't know what the crap behind the edge thickness is, and now you do. This knife is in MAGNACUT, so we have quite a bit of toughness. We are not at the absolute peak of toughness, but we have quite a bit of toughness. For what it's worth, we have incredible corrosion resistance and good edge holding too. At the blade, what have I experienced? The weight and heft of the knife is nice. The hollow grind is not, I would call it a middle ground hollow grind. It's a little bit deeper than my Mineral Mountain Hatchet Works knives, which are indestructible essentially. But it's not as deep as, say, an Anza or some other things. With this modified edge thickness, this knife performs exceptionally well. So this behind the edge thickness, it's a little bit thicker than I would want with a full flat grind, even a little thicker than I would want with a saber grind. With those more traditional grinds for a knife this size, I feel like performance would be lacking given the spine thickness, which is not a thick spine, but thicker than a machete, right? However, being a hollow grind, it does work exceptionally well. You get a little bit more cutting efficiency from your primary grind at the cost of apex stability. If you can make up a little bit of that apex stability with a little bit of behind the edge thickness, you can find a wonderful balance. And I believe that is exactly what Dawson has done here. So the blade, I am a huge fan of it. Let's talk about the handle real quick. All right, so the handle. I have heard a lot of people say a lot of different things about Dawson knives in general, being a knife nerd, once again, about big choils and this and that and the other. What I can say is the handle on this one that I have used, the shape is rather unique. The rounded back here does not give you necessarily security, but it also doesn't cause hot spots. We have a bit of a hook here. We have a bit of finger choil here. For me and my hands, size large gloves, this is a 2-position handle, possibly even 3-position. I can use this choil comfortably. I can back it up a bit, or I can back it up all all the way when chopping. It's been exceptionally good for me. This is a slick finish that they did on this G10. It is not completely rounded. It is flat on the sides here, but it is rounded enough. It indexes fantastically. Being a slick finish, you do not get high friction points on your hands. You do not get a lot of fatigue, and the shape of the handle is good enough to lock it in for security. It is an exceptional handle. The sheath I'm a little bit torn on. This is a nice sheath. Does it meet my expectations? Maybe. Again, Dawson is making this sheath here completely different than anybody else in the industry. They're doing their own thing. They're not following the typical rule book or playbook or whatever else. So we have a Kydex sheath, but we do not have a positive retention click like a typical proper Kydex sheath. We have a friction fit. Typically, that would be an automatic no-go at this station. I have high expectations for Kydex. However, in use, it's worked quite well. So they've done their Kydex different than usual. It is not what I would choose if I could choose anything. If I could choose anything, I would have this sheath be a little bit lower here, give you more handle to grab onto. When you pop it in and it gets that last little bit in, I would expect to hear a loud click, a snap as it locks into place. Then I'd have to use my thumb to unlock it and then draw without resistance, and that is not what we have here. However, on the belt, it has worked exceptionally well. It's been easy to use. I've had no issues with security. That was surprising to me because when I first saw it, I was like, nope, this ain't it. But it does work pretty well. It is nicely made. It's not overly bulky. We again have something unique for your belt attachment method with these Kydex bars here. Now, as a general rule, I do not trust Kydex to hold a load because Kydex has a finite number of flexations that it can make. The greater the level of flexation, the lower the number that it can withstand and withhold, and temperature does affect that. However, this Kydex is not holding the weight. The bolts are at either end. This Kydex doesn't flex at all. So I think it's a good idea. I'm not sure that I like the execution. So the way that your leather belt goes through here over the curve of the knife, it does hold the knife in place very nicely. It does not move around a lot. So if you're a guy who likes a dangler, you're not going to like this exact sheath setup here. I'm sure that you could set up a dangler, but it does hold in place very nicely, very rigid. However, if you have a thick leather belt like a gun belt, it won't go through here. Different, not bad, just a balance, all right? Also, it doesn't affect anything, but the way that the drain hole is done at the bottom is very odd to me, almost like they have two sides of a mold that are slightly different. Now, I have experienced that, I think, mostly with Tops knives and maybe with a couple others where the two sides of the Kydex were completely different and it didn't work for piss because the literal print of the knife was in a completely different position. That's not the case here. Either sides are book matched perfectly. It does fit in there perfectly. It does work perfectly. So I guess we just have a funky drain hole. Doesn't bother me a bit because it works, but it's weird and maybe worth mentioning. All right, so I'm gonna wrap up this review. It's already been too long and I have certainly had this knife for too long of a time. Dawson Knives is pushing the boundaries on steel, pushing the boundaries, I think, on what they can do with their grind and the size of their knives. And so is this knife a one-off that I got that will not be represented in future manufacturing, or did they learn through the process of getting some warranty returns on these knives that the edge is a little bit too thin, and going forward, are they going to alleviate that issue? I personally believe, I reached out to Dawson Knives, I personally believe that they will fix this issue, that they will take this edge thickness into consideration going forward to match the behind the edge thickness to the size and intended use of the knife a little bit differently. I think that they were trying to push the limits on performance, and they pushed just a step too far, but the sign of a good company is fixing that and making it right. I do greatly appreciate that. And to support my belief that I think they're going to go a little bit thicker on the edge on knives that are this size and with this grind, they just released a machete in MAGNACUT. Now, MAGNACUT is still really expensive, guys. It's a premium steel, and you are going to pay a premium for it. And you don't see a lot of really large MAGNACUT knives. I really appreciate Dawson, because you don't have a lot of options for nicer large knives. I think your ideal balance of performance to value is the SE Hunglus and Hunglus 2. And I think that we could do better than the Hunglus and the Hunglus 2 for value if large knives were more popular, but they aren't. Guys, it's a supply and demand thing, so the demand is relatively low and the supply is relatively low, so the people who want one are going to have to pay more money. So I appreciate that Dawson is doing bigger knives, but they're not just doing bigger knives in normal steels. They're doing bigger knives in MAGNACUT. That's exponentially more expensive. And they just dropped a doggone machete. I wouldn't actually fully consider it a machete. It's a machete shape. It's about 1/5 of an inch thick, so it's still relatively thick. But it is a big old beast in MAGNACUT. And Dawson, I do not believe, would be manufacturing a knife that large in MAGNACUT if they had not figured this stuff out. So going forward, this is the Gatekeeper. Dawson's kind of a semi-custom brand. They have models, but I think that they rotate through those models fairly regularly. I don't think that they'd be going that big. Look, if you're making a knife this big, and things start going wrong and you've got a good warranty, that's a huge liability, and they're not going to go that much bigger unless they've got it dialed. So I am pretty excited about Dawson. What I think that they do well, I think they do beautiful finishes. I think that they do a lot of attention to detail. This knife has performed exceptionally well for me. Their knives have their own look. I think so they're pretty cool. They're pretty doggone cool. If you've got the coin to spend on the knives with this particular blade as an example, I think it's a good way to go. Now, with that being said, this is the only one that I've ever reviewed. I can't speak to Dawson for all time across their history or for the future across all models. What I can tell you is I'm impressed. I like the knife. They've found a good balance of performance, and I believe that they are truly dedicated to making a good product, and I'm excited to see where they go from here. And I'm talking to the guys, and I think they're a good, honest group of people who are truly motivated to do something right. You know, in this industry, there are knife companies that will continue to sell a product no matter how bad the quality or the design, so long as they can continue to get sales. They don't care about the bad rap, the bad press, the bad reviews, the warranty returns. If it's still selling, they're still making. I don't think Dawson's like that. I think they are truly invested in putting out a good product. And hey, there's enough guys like me out there that are truly invested in sharing honest reviews and opinions without worrying about the feelings of manufacturers, that I think that a company like Dawson can continue to elevate. That's what I've got. Thank you for watching. Huge shout out to my buddy who sent this out to me. I'll be getting this back to you. Huge shout out to all of my viewers that become subscribers, that ultimately become friends and supporters. You guys are awesome. And by the way, on that note, yes, I do have my own knife brand as well, Exodus Knife and Tool, exodusknifeandtool.com. If you enjoy this channel, consider checking out my product. I think, I think they're made in America by White River Knife and Tool for me. No questions asked, lifetime guarantee. And I think that they're some of the best knives on the planet for my intended uses, which are basically versatility, everyday carry, and practicality, bushcraft, hunting, whatever. they're a good way to go. This video's gotten weird, but most people don't watch videos this long, and obviously I'm shooting from the hip, so this has not gone well. I also make rifle slings, beachandtactical.com. I'm a veteran. They're completely made out of mil-spec, Berry compliant, made in the USA components. They rock and roll. That's all I've got besides Patreon and affiliate links and all that crap in the description box below. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments section below, and I'll talk to you there, and I hope that you have a blessed day.